A bolt from the blue, Kazakhstan is openly playing against Moscow. Massive traffic jams stretch for kilometers at the Kazakhstan-Russia border. Customs officers are not letting Russian trucks through. A fuel strike, Kazakhstan has shut off Moscow's fuel supply. Russia is drowning in gasoline chaos. Putin's empire, it's the end. A knife to the heart of the Kremlin. Zelensky and Tokayev against the madman. Kazakhstan has taken Ukraine's side and is reaching out to the West. I'll tell you all the details in a moment. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. I'm Victoria Panchenko, and here are the latest events. A sensation, Kazakhstan has challenged the Kremlin. Tokayev has stopped dancing to Putin's tune. Moscow is in shock. Astana is stepping out from under the shadow of the Russian Federation and looking toward the West and Ukraine. Kazakhstan's customs has begun inspecting 99% of cargo trucks transporting goods from China to Russia that could fall under sanctions. At the same time, the Russian Federal Customs Service claims on its Telegram channel that the border is open and they've sorted everything out.
We are currently located in Uralsk, which is very near the border area with the significant Mashtakovo customs post. We recently spoke with the various drivers and also the carriers involved in this important operation. We are waiting for them in Russia. We spoke with our colleagues from the Republic of Kazakhstan. We have complete understanding and cooperation.
But as they say, there are some nuances. No one has lifted the sanctions. Therefore, many carriers fearing inspection are returning to parking lots to wait for a better moment, according to media reports.
Queues began to build up in mid-September, mostly from vehicles with dual-use cargoes suspected of containing goods subject to sanctions. Electronics, drones and their parts, clothing, goods from Western brands. Customs inspections of such goods occur in 99% of cases.
Cargo that is not subject to sanctions crosses the border in an average of 3 to 5 days, which is also longer than before. According to media reports, about 7,500 trucks have accumulated at the Kazakhstan-Russia border.
There is a list of cargo that is risky to transport through Kazakhstan. They will be turned back in 100% of cases. These are microchips and any kind of machinery.
Notably, media reports state that the Chinese side had already warned on September 18th that, due to disagreements between the governments of Kazakhstan and Russia regarding the customs union agreement, entry and exit through border checkpoints have been temporarily suspended. It seems that Tokayev has sharply shifted the country's political direction away from Russia. A major crack in the Russian world. Kazakhstan is moving out from under the Kremlin's influence. The empire is falling apart. Kazakhstan is yet another nail in the coffin of Putin's regime. Tokayev is changing course and seeking an alliance with Ukraine. Watch now for all the details.
Ukrainian President Zelensky and Kazakh President Tokayev met in New York for the first time since 2019. On the sidelines of the UN Assembly, Tokayev stated that it is time to sit down at the negotiating table, although he did not directly condemn Russia.
Kazakhstan remains concerned about the crisis around Ukraine, which continues to inflict serious harm on civilians, undermine global trust, and weaken international security. Nevertheless, it is necessary to continue bilateral and international diplomatic efforts to resolve this conflict.
Kazakhstan appears to maintain neutrality on the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian war and offers its mediation services.
Kazakhstan initially offered its services as a possible mediator and only as a venue for negotiations between the two opposing sides. That position has not changed.
But as they say, the devil is in the details, and there are many details in Kazakhstan's relations with both Russia and Ukraine. For example, Kazakhstan refused to cooperate with Moscow on building a nuclear power plant. China will build them instead. Also, according to Kazakh authorities, they are preventing Russia from circumventing Western sanctions.
That is why I am taking measures to ensure that our territory is not used to bypass these sanctions. Various comprehensive measures are currently being taken, including the meticulous tracking of goods, advanced online tracking systems for these goods, and even the dedicated creation of a specialized user-friendly website where you can conveniently check whether a particular company or a specific product is indeed present on the official sanctions list known as traderadar.kz. I firmly believe that all our diligent exporters are fully aware of these crucial regulations and consequently are diligently complying with them.
And President Tokayev stated that he does not recognize the legitimacy of the so-called LNR and DNR.
We do not officially recognize Taiwan, Kosovo, South Abkhazia, South Ossetia, or Abkhazia as independent states. And apparently this fundamental principle and established policy will be applied in precisely the same manner to our current situation as well. That is to say, to the regions of Luhansk and Donetsk, which are currently experiencing significant geopolitical complexities.
Of course, Russian politicians and propagandists cannot tolerate such audacity and regularly threaten Kazakhstan with war, claiming the same things they said about Ukraine, that these are supposedly originally Russian territories.
If we truly don't take proper care of Ukraine, we will inevitably have significant problems with Kazakhstan, with the army, and with many other countries as well. The same situation.
With Kazakhstan, you mean? Well,
of course.
Why?
Well, just look at what's happening in Kazakhstan today in terms of, so to speak, building up a Kazakh state, how national mythology about independence is flourishing there, about the switch to the Latin alphabet. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there if you really pay attention.
The situation in Ukraine is clearly reflected in Kazakhstan. There too, there are huge regions populated by Russian speakers.
In Kazakhstan, some people believe that in the future we want, as they say, to take northern Kazakhstan from them according to the Ukrainian scenario. What do you think? Did we ever have such plans if we are talking about this?
We have historical rights to this land. These are industrial regions. These are cities that our ancestors built. That's it. Why did we give them away in '91? For no reason at all.
Because of this, Kazakhstan created a list of Russian citizens who are banned from entering Ukraine. This list includes about a dozen deputies of the Russian State Duma, as well as such notorious figures as Kandelaki, the ideologist of the Russian world Dugin, and the late husband of propagandist Simonyan.
Kazakhs, brothers, what kind of ingratitude is this?
Look at Ukraine. Pay attention. Think about it seriously. If you think you can keep being so sly and get away with it, you're mistaken.
President Zelensky has repeatedly stated, citing intelligence data, that Russia has military plans for Kazakhstan.
Yes, we have indeed received information indicating that among their primary priorities are the Baltic countries, specifically Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, as well as Moldova and also Kazakhstan. These are the closest targets of the Russian Federation.
The president of Kazakhstan stated that he would put an end to attempts at separatism, while Kazakh deputies went further and laid claims to territories that are currently part of Russia.
As responsible citizens, we must oppose any manifestations of radicalism, extremism, and separatism. Be delicate, but at the same time be firm. Above all, be fair.
We need to understand that Novosibirsk is Novosibirsk, but these are our Kazakh territories. Tyumen is Tyumen. These are the southern lands of the Golden Horde, meaning even beyond Tyumen and further north are our territories. Knyaz Rimburg, Ombor. And when the capital of the Kazakh state was there,
there was also a lot of different information from intelligence. For example, that Putin demanded Tokayev supply weapons for the war with Ukraine. And after Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries, he begged Kazakhstan for gasoline. At the same time, Putin constantly deliberately mispronounces Tokayev's patronymic, apparently doing so on purpose.
Everyone knows, of course, that the president of Kazakhstan, Kazimierz Tokayev, appealed for help to the members of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Kazimierz Amelik spoke. We believe Kazimierz, it's good to see you again. Kazimierz Amelik said that there are 27 million children. We believe Kazimierz.
Putin's plan was to draw Kazakhstan into the so-called Union State, following the example of Belarus, but he failed. Tokayev only rejected such proposals.
I truly think that there is no real pressing need for this particular initiative, since there are indeed other significant integration associations already in existence, primarily the very influential Eurasian Economic Union. I genuinely believe there is absolutely no need for this, since there are other important integration associations, primarily the well-established Eurasian Economic Union. As for the matter of nuclear weapons, we absolutely do not need them at all.
Even those who seem to be Russia's closest allies understand that it's impossible to trust terrorists and murderers, so it's necessary to keep them at a distance and, if possible, support those who oppose them.
And now in Russia, even the Z propagandist Mardan is suggesting to invade and carry out a sweep in Kazakhstan because of the attack by good drones on the Orsk oil refinery.
The Orsk oil refinery attacked by drones is 1,400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border to Orsk. It's quite obvious that the drones were launched from the territory of Kazakhstan. Hence the question, isn't it time to carry out a raid on the territory of independent Kazakhstan in order to eliminate threats to Russia's national security? It would be best to immediately conduct a sweep there as well.
Notably, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has repeatedly warned Kazakhstan about possible risks from Russia.
I don't know what's on Putin's mind. There are risks associated with Kazakhstan and other countries of the former USSR.
This statement was made after numerous drone raids in EU countries. According to experts and politicians, these UAVs were launched by Russia.
There have been reports of airspace violations in Europe. These are not isolated incidents, but a worrying trend.
This is not just a threat to individual countries, but to the security of all of Europe. The response must be united by the EU and NATO together with the US. Russia is trying to divide the allies, but it is precisely a united stance that can deter aggression, the president stated.
The risks are also spreading to the countries of the former USSR. Moldova has managed to choose the European path, but the threat remains, just as it does for Kazakhstan and other states. That is why we must be prepared for new challenges.
And yet another devastating blow to Putin's ambitions. Kazakhstan, as already mentioned, has sharply reduced its export of benzene to Russia, defying Moscow. At a critical moment for Russia, Kazakhstan cut off the fuel supply, triggering a new chain of the gasoline crisis that is already paralyzing regions. The fuel agony in Russia is gaining momentum and is even approaching the capital. The Kremlin is in a panic. All the details are coming up next.
An absolute anti-record for Putin. Cars in Russia are ceasing to be a means of transportation and are turning into a luxury item. After all, it is becoming increasingly difficult for Russian residents to refuel their iron horses. Despite the fact that the Kremlin extracts an immeasurable amount of oil, the country is facing a shortage of gasoline and diesel fuel.
It's as if this is happening in a country that used to be a gas station and not just an outdated appendage of China, an economy built on pipelines, and now it can't even provide its own population and businesses with oil and petroleum products.
The main culprit behind the catastrophic fuel shortage across the border has been the Ukrainian armed forces and their precision strikes on the occupiers' oil refining infrastructure. By the end of September, oil refineries across Russia were idling at least 38% of their primary oil processing capacity, or 338,000 tons per day. For the former gas station country, this is a colossal market collapse. Recently, the fuel shortage has become acutely felt, even at the front lines. At regular Russian gas stations, you can't find 95-octane fuel in most regions, even if you search all day.
In particular, at certain gas stations, they began to temporarily limit the amount of fuel sold to one person, somewhere up to 20 liters, somewhere up to 30 liters. They started rationing sales. And at other stations in some regions of Russia, they even temporarily suspended the sale of certain types of fuel altogether. That is, in some places there was no 92-octane gasoline available, in others there was no 95-octane, and so on. At the same time, at small independent private gas stations that are not part of the so-called vertically integrated oil companies, there was a sharp increase in fuel prices.
The recent situation in the country has only made things worse. Along with the shortage at gas stations came sky-high prices. This summer, the price of gasoline and diesel in Russia has increased by a solid 15 to 20%. And starting from autumn, the price tags on gas station signs across the border have been changing almost daily, each time adding 1 or 2 rubles to the cost of fuel. But even such an increase is not enough to cover the expenses of Russian oil refineries, which are now operating under constant attacks from Ukrainian armed forces drones.
The scale of the deficit is such that this is a desperate attempt to hit the pockets of oilmen, to quickly squeeze the surviving oil companies, many of which have gone bankrupt, just to somehow supply the domestic market.
Things are even worse for Russian oil traders on foreign markets than they are domestically. If previously the state compensated for the price difference through exports, today almost no one in Europe is buying Russian oil. So there's no longer any compelling reason to expect truly cheap gasoline within Russia itself. Not in the foreseeable future.
Oil traders can't make money on foreign markets because of sanctions and falling oil prices. Right now, Russian oil is trading at $55 to $57 per barrel, taking into account all the discounts and markdowns. And that's it. So now the oil companies are left with nothing, going around with outstretched hands, desperately asking for help in the form of lower taxes, reduced mineral extraction tax rates, export duties, and excise taxes. But the authorities can't do that because their budget is falling apart, they're short on funds, the budget is in crisis.
There's nothing left to patch up the hole in the Russian economy. As a result, the Kremlin couldn't come up with anything better than to announce the start of fuel imports into the country, while simultaneously halting all exports of gasoline and diesel from the Russian Federation.
Putin has won, but in the Baltic, gasoline prices are rising. Well, I think this is a victory. We have to admit that Russia will now be buying gasoline. How can we not recall Churchill here, who said that when the Soviet Union starts buying wheat, that's when it will come to an end? Similarly, when Putin's Russia starts buying gasoline, after some time it will come to an end, just as the Soviet Union once did.
The Ukrainian authorities have also actively taken up the task of helping Russia come to an end. Alongside drone attacks on oil refineries, Kyiv is also striking at Putin's economy on the diplomatic front.
If Ukraine meticulously synchronizes its comprehensive strategy regarding Russia with its crucial international allies, including the European Union, the United States of America, and various other significant global partners, then without a doubt, all matters and developments will proceed accordingly and successfully. In fact,
in such a hopeless situation, the Kremlin is grasping at its last straw. Disregarding all environmental regulations, the government has practically legalized counterfeit products, hoping that at least this will satisfy the Russian gasoline market. However, analysts assure that such a decision will actually drive the final nail into the coffin of oil refining in the Russian Federation.
The authorities decided to fight the gasoline shortage with methods that are harmful to people's health and damage car engines. Deputy Prime Minister Novak proposed to bring back for 6 months a special gasoline additive that was banned back in 2016. They want to use it to increase gasoline production, but there's a catch. That additive has a negative impact on the environment, damages the condition of cars, increases the content of nitrogen oxide in exhaust fumes, and settles in the air at a height of 60 centimeters above the ground. Breathing in these vapors is dangerous for people. Among the symptoms of poisoning are slowed reactions and a bluish tint to the hands and ears.
And such a surrogate with toxic additives can instantly turn an engine into a pile of scrap metal. After just 6 months of driving on such fuel, a car will become unusable, just like all Russian public transport. Then, without proper gasoline and diesel, the entire multi-million country will be forced to switch to good old horse-drawn carts. It seems
that Kazakhstan is skillfully finishing off Russia on the political front as well. Let me remind you that recently on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, the President of Ukraine met with the President of Kazakhstan, and both of them spoke about peace. Such a scenario is clearly not to Putin's liking.
I met with the President of Kazakhstan, Tokayev. Right now, the key task is to achieve a just and lasting peace with reliable security guarantees. We discussed in detail Ukraine's efforts, as well as those of Europe and other partners around the world, to end this war and stop the killing. We also touched separately on issues of trade and economic cooperation, and the interest of Kazakh companies in participating in Ukraine's reconstruction. I thank Kazakhstan for supporting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And once again, Zelensky added fuel to the fire. The president of Ukraine stated that Putin was offered negotiations at the leaders' level, even in Kazakhstan.
Trump's team, my team, the Europeans, including Macron and other leaders, and the president of Turkey. I know that President Erdogan was in Europe. All of us proposed a meeting in Turkey, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Europe, in neutral countries such as Austria or Switzerland. We said, even if you want somewhere like Kazakhstan, we are ready.
Notably, Europe is also waking up from the delusion of the Russian world. EU countries have begun to increase their military presence near the eastern borders, viewing Russia as a direct threat. The atmosphere of tension is rising. The continent is, in fact, mobilizing and preparing for a possible large-scale confrontation. See all the details right now.
Europe is actively preparing for war with Russia. Most EU country leaders are convinced. The scale of today's conflict will inevitably go beyond Ukraine. After all, Putin has no intention of stopping. After Kyiv, he wants to take Warsaw, Vilnius, Berlin, and Paris.
And then, we have Paris and also Berlin. And upon the desolate ruins of Washington, we will proudly write our own modest names. That's basically the mood.
And similar statements from the Kremlin about a possible invasion of Europe are no longer considered empty talk in the West. EU countries are actively preparing for a potential, or rather a very real invasion.
Moscow sees itself as being at war with the West in general. And that also includes NATO. They consider any sign of weakness as an invitation to go further and to test NATO's readiness and determination to defend every inch of its territory.
The first to demonstrate their determination to resist the Kremlin occupiers, not just with words, but with action, were the Baltic countries. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are actively preparing for a possible invasion, bringing their military units to
combat readiness and strengthening defensive lines on the border with the Russian Federation. All NATO countries that border Russia or Belarus are coming to the conclusion that, to deter a possible offensive, resources are needed that until recently were considered unacceptable.
Along the entire length of the borders with the Russian Federation, anti-tank hedgehogs, trenches, rows of barbed wire, and so-called dragon's teeth are appearing. It has reached the point of seeming almost ridiculous. But this is the only way to counter Putin's army.
Even more unusual means of defense are appearing. In Lithuania, they once drained a swamp on the border with Belarus, but now they say the swamp needs to be refilled so that Russian tanks can't get through. And in general, they're right.
Meanwhile, France is preparing not to defend itself, but to receive the wounded. Many, many wounded. Official Paris is urgently checking hospitals to see if they can accommodate military personnel. The French authorities believe that an attack by the Kremlin on the North Atlantic Alliance could happen in just 6 months.
According to journalists, Paris is predicting a scenario in which the country could serve as a rear base capable of receiving a large number of wounded soldiers from France and even from other European countries. Preparations are underway for the possible reception of up to 50,000 military personnel alone over the course of 6 months.
At the same time, the French authorities are actively preparing their air force for a possible invasion. Like most European countries, France is recruiting and urgently training more and more new volunteers.
The French region is very strong and responds accordingly to the threats facing the future of France. And of course, according to statistics, for example, many surveys are conducted among young people using various estimates. But the overwhelming majority, more than half of young people, are already signing up, ready to serve in the military, volunteering for this service.
But in Germany, there are no lines of people eager to join the Bundeswehr. The local authorities admit that they are already experiencing a shortage of personnel.
We are lacking personnel. We need approximately 50 to 60,000 more soldiers than we currently have in our standing armed forces. Of course, the question arises, will it be enough? I can only repeat, a mandatory draft into the army is not what we need right now. At the moment, we simply don't have the capacity. We are talking about barracks and the training of soldiers.
Against this backdrop, anxiety is growing among the population in Europe. And while Estonians are anxiously awaiting new provocations in the air from Russian MiGs, Poles on Ukrainian territory, where Putin's drones and Shaheds have already repeatedly intruded, are hastily fleeing the country. More and more of them. They are searching for housing abroad. According to Western real estate agencies, residents of Gdansk, Warsaw, and Krakow are actively relocating, particularly to Portugal and Spain. In the latter, the number of housing applications from Poles has increased at least threefold over the past month.
Only 30% of those surveyed said they would want to leave Poland in the event of an attack. 70% are ready to stay. But what is the real number? Of course, we will only see that if such an invasion begins, or if the shelling starts. The fact that Poles have long been buying apartments in Spain far from a possible attack on their country is already a well-known fact.
Meanwhile, the Polish authorities are actively investing money in their own bomb shelters. For many Polish cities, modernizing and equipping them is almost a top priority.
The country's security agencies have ordered nearly 4,000 buildings to be inspected for their suitability to shelter people. The government of the Republic has also allocated 5 billion zlotys.
But as for the Germans, in the event of an attack from Russia, not only are they not planning to flee anywhere, they aren't even in a hurry to go to municipal bomb shelters. In Germany, there is a surge in demand for building private bunkers. And it's all because of the same fear of a Russian attack on NATO countries. Thus, since January 2025, the number of requests for designing and building bunkers in Germany has increased by half, according to Bild. There have been especially many applications for personal bunkers from Germans after the latest provocations by Putin. And today, the most popular among EU citizens are private, medium-sized bunkers with an area of 30 square meters. The cost of each of these is approximately 30 to 50,000 euros. And
what do you think about such a shift in Kazakhstan's political direction? We look forward to your comments. Stay tuned for more, keep up with the main news, and don't forget to like. Wishing you peaceful skies above.